Well, I've been kind of obsessed with kaiju and giant monsters since I was a little kid, particularly Toho monsters. I've watched the movies forwards, backwards, special features in Japanese, with subtitles and without. I played Godzilla, destroy all monsters, save the earth, and unleash constantly. Also, if you happen to find those games, please tell me where they are. Although I never really got good at them. Anyways, I've loved them for basically a lifetime. But a recent love of mine is speculative evolution. And today, how about we combine these two things together into this episode of Waytat? Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Waytat. I'm your host, William, and I will be your guide through the crazy possibilities of kaiju today. And yes, before we really get into everything, yes, this episode is late. As you can hear from my voice, I am still sick. But that's also partly why shorts aren't coming yet. Um, the other part of why shorts aren't coming is because life still kind of blows right now, and I'm trying to recover. But you can help me out by continuing to like, comment, and subscribe. And wow, that sounds manipulative, but no, it really does help a lot to interact with the show, share it around, and recommend people to check out episodes or go back and look at old episodes that I the kind of episodes I don't really do anymore. But even just name dropping me in conversation helps out a lot. Also, check out my Twitter and send in an email if you want to get in touch directly. Also, make sure to follow and watch Win Kashika on Twitch and check out their VODs on YouTube. And also go to their Discord if you want more stuff from me and from other people. Also, check out Mystic Luna and Captain Cupcake for some awesome craftwork, stickers, and art. And yes, Captain Cupcake is hot, and no, she's not single. They'll be in my description to head to the Shopify page. And with that, on to the show. All right, time to get Biosphere in. We're going to start off by establishing a few core concepts. Firstly, we got to figure out what exactly a kaiju is. Like, what are we aiming for? Now, in general terms, they're just a big monster, usually insanely large and usually fighting other kaiju and wrecking cities. But when we get more technical, what we call kaiju in the West are technically daikaiju, but also these species generally need to be about 20 meters tall. Also, we're using metric a lot in this bitch today, so watch out for that. Which begs the question, how big can we possibly get without just completely bullshitting making stuff up? Well, unfortunately, nothing that big. For a sea creature, maybe. We might be able to get away with it, but the problem is that for large land animals, we tend to max out nowadays at about 12 feet tall and 1,500 pounds, which would be roughly about 4 meters, which would be an African elephant. And why is that? Well, because the old frenemy of all speculative biologists, kaiju lovers, and gym bros everywhere, the square cube law, which is basically a thing in physics and biology where an object's size is proportional, whereas its surface area squares the volume cubes. And volume is closely tied to mass, meaning as volume cubes, so does mass. Meanwhile, physical strength squares, meaning the larger a creature is, the weaker proportionally it is compared to a creature of smaller size, because the more of its musculature is worried about carrying its own weight. The generation of heat is also highly affected, being lost by surface area but generated through mass, meaning larger animals generate more heat. But I mean, back in the day, we had massive creatures well over 40 meters tall. So what gives? How do we unlock this power? Surprisingly, kind of easily, actually. See, to have animal gigantism like that, you need a few things. Also, the urge to say your mother has been ever increasing, but she's a MILF, and we all know I'd rather not blow my chance. Just like your mom. Anyways, the simplest way is to find a way to reduce their volume. And the easiest way might be the way dinosaurs did it: air sacs around their bones and inside their organs and musculature. These would decrease weight without reducing size. Now, secondly, because of the energy needs of endothermic body heat, it's not really feasible for anything bigger than an elephant. They have a maximum size because at a certain point, just generating body heat to maintain homeostasis with your surface area requires you to eat way more than you'd actually be capable of. Humans don't have to deal with this since we're on the small side of large mammals, which we are, by the way. Technically, we're a large mammal. Weird kind of mindfuck, huh? So, to save energy, we'll have all of them be exothermic, like a reptile. Thanks, phone. Now, third, you need an extremely high oxygen environment. See, nowadays we don't have enough oxygen in the environment anymore. And for once, this isn't our fault. Mostly. See, after the collapse of rainforests, right before the most recent ice age, oxygen began being taken up by other things and wasn't being recycled fast enough by trees. And while this isn't a strict requirement, it'll help out a lot of their natural habitat is very oxygen rich. Now, speaking of habitats, modern habitats don't produce the amount of food needed to maintain massive creatures like that anymore. And also, the habitat needs plenty of stuff to protect the creature from not only predators, but the environment. See, elephants aren't just the size they are because they can't find enough food. They're too dense, they're warm blooded. It's because the African sun is fucking brutal, the bugs are terrible, and the nights are freezing cold. And they get away with it because they can throw dust, mud, and water on themselves and hide within trees and amongst each other. So that gives us some good rules for the speculative biospheres from kaiju. Rule 1: all kaiju are exotherms. Rule 2: they either have to be aquatic, or if they're on land, they're going to have internalized air sacs to support their own weight. Rule 3: they have to fit into the food web to have good access to food. And fourth, all kaiju would need to live in a place that supports their need for shelter, parasite control, and weather defense. And with that in mind, we'll just do a simple food web today. Just a handful of species for our very own kaiju land, which we'll say exists somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. An undiscovered semi-continent like Madagascar, New Zealand, England, or Nova Scotia. And our food web needs to have its own primary producers, being creatures pulling energy from the environment itself, like plants and autotrophs. Primary consumers, creatures that eat those things. Secondary consumers that eat those. And then tertiary consumers, or today's apex predators, which eat everything below them. And of course, we have to have our trash eaters, the decomposers. And we're also going to do both some land and water kaiju, mind all creatures that exist vaguely in the same area of the world. And looking at our primary producers, we're actually going to be making 3 today. The baseline of our aquatic autotrophs is a species of chemotrophic plankton that fills the ocean basically from the coastline to the twilight zone of the water. These guys are going to form large connected colonies of red, yellow, and green plankton. And what are they eating down there? Well, just the heat and incredibly caustic chemicals being produced by the massive fucking magma vents in the water surrounding Kaiju Land. This is very important to support basically the entire food chain in the water, and they'll end up looking like massive colonies of brightly colored mold growing across sea vents, absorbing the acidic elements of the seawater that mixes in with the stuff coming out of the sea vents, and forming floating platforms. Ironically, these guys would do very well in heavily polluted environments, which might encourage us to use them. which that might also explain why we would be seeing kaiju in this universe. Anyways, moving to the land, the primary anchor species for the massive jungles of Kaiju Land would be truly titanic conifer trees, like what we saw in the heyday of the dinosaurs, surviving very well off the ambient heat, CO2, and humidity of our little continent. And they'll be very similar to those ones, being 60 meters tall and producing a fuck ton of oxygen. These guys will serve as a dominant plant across the subcontinent, shaping the entire plant biosphere around them. And we'll call them Kong Founder trees. Because get it, they look like monkey puzzle trees and King Kong is a kaiju. I'll see myself out. But growing up, these trees and most other trees around the continent would be these massive fruiting vines growing on them. They'll be the primary food source for most herbivores. And while technically any of the trees can support some of these vines, the Kong founders would be the most viable, being both massive and also having dominance to the skies, allowing the vines to have guaranteed photosynthesis access. And these vines are going to have big ass fruit on them. They're going to be leathery skinned, very liquidy fruit filled with seeds suspended in a sugary, nutrient dense slurry. Why? Well, because these vines have a positive relationship with most of the animals on the island. They essentially eat the seeds from the fruit. They essentially eat the seeds while eating the fruit slurry, getting a big boost in nutrients in exchange for carrying these very tough seeds in their stomach. Seeds with very little nutrition. Basically incentivizing that species that eat them shouldn't try to break down the seeds, and so they pass them in their poop, allowing new vines access to soil and repeat the cycle. And assuming the average fruit is about a 20 centimeter ball that has very similar density to water, each fruit weighs about 4.3 kilos, which is fucking heavy. And since most sugary fruit has about 60 calories per 100 grams, that means these bad boys pack about 2,600 calories apiece. Now, here's the other cool thing. Since the herbivores eating these vines might take some of the vine with them as well, let's make these vines a lot like hair follicles, where vines and fruit grow essentially endlessly, and the only part you need to keep alive are the roots. Following that logic, it might actually be helpful for the long-term health of literally everything to keep the vines pruned back by eating them. Meaning they'll be provided that benefit too. And let's call these suckers Titan vine. But let's move on to our primary consumers. Our land one is going to be surviving largely off of these Titan vines. Now, largely given that these vines can reach the top of Kong founder trees, to make the best of this feature, we'll want a big boy. Since climbing won't necessarily be all that viable for our kaiju-sized creatures, and because I love maximalizing, we're going to make them a big turtle. Well, technically tortoise. In order to eat food at the top of these trees, I want them to have massive neck movement, about 2/3 the length of their body, which is about the same as a snapping turtle. Meaning to lean up and eat vines at the top of the trees, their maximum is 60 meters. And doing the math, if they're sitting on their butt and leaning upwards, that means their neck would be about 15 meters long, and their entire body would be 45 meters. And doing some quick triangle math, that means their actual body height would be about 54 meters. So these boys are taller than they are long, meaning that they've got some crazy ass legs. Also, given these measurements, we can measure out their mass, about 26.5 million kilograms, which is yeah, holy fuck, that's big. You know the Bagger 293, the big ass mining machines I'm putting on screen right now? Yeah, that's about how much they weigh. Also, if you're on the audio version, look up Bagger 293. Spelled exactly how it sounds. I'll give you a second. Yeah, okay. But how much would these guys need to eat? Well, there's an equation you can use to determine the calories per day a creature needs, called Kleber's Law. Is equal to mass to the power of 3/4. And while it is much more complicated in real life, and biologists have been debating its usefulness or not, and also have been adding on to it and removing things from it for decades, this basis is broadly applicable for exothermic animals, and it's going to be fine for our purposes today. And these guys would need to eat 370,000 calories per day, which sounds extreme, but it's only actually about 140 fruits per day. And given that proportionally speaking, each of these fruits are like a human eating grapes, that's not all that bad. Especially because how these dudes will probably eat is just go near a big tree, sit their white ass down, and stretch their neck to the top and just strip the vine down until their tummy is full. Like eating spaghetti off your boyfriend's penis. Now, why do they need to sit down if they're just gonna eat stuff that's pretty close to their height? Well, because of their defensive adaptations. Since their primary predators are going to be squeezing on their shell, we'll give these boys extremely durable, highly reinforced shells with razor sharp edges and random unique barb and ridge patterns on their back to dissuade that kind of behavior. Which is why they sit, so they don't cut themselves. Now, to protect them from other predators, they'll also have the habit of letting symbiotic plants, moss, and dirt cover their back, turning their backs into a miniature forest to help them hide or give them bonus protection from attackers. And we'll call those lads Thotahapa, named after the world turtle. And for the water, our primary consumer actually runs into a little bit of an issue. Because having a massive kaiju-sized creature that lives entirely off of plants is difficult to say the least. Which is why a lot of massive creatures, even the ones that we usually think of herbivores like whales, are actually carnivores. Which means that, unfortunately, we can't really do a pure primary consumer. So instead, we'll mix it with our decomposer. And, you know how our land one was a big turtle? How about big hagfish? Yeah, not really all that cute compared to a turtle, but it has a good number of advantages. Firstly, the slime. It's a really good defense mechanism that protects them from most predators, turning the water into jizzy mucus to choke people. Yummy. Secondly, they're able to eat basically fucking anything. Hagfish can twist, knot, and tie themselves into weird positions to get the leverage to rip things apart from the inside. And these big boys would be using this ability to eat not only dead things, but rip into rock to get to chemotrophs. Now, these guys will also have extra little filters in their cheeks to stop microscopic chemotrophs from escaping. And third, this body plan is very easy to make a body plan that never stops growing. Meaning we can use these guys as food for really anything and justify it very easily as just they keep getting bigger. With that in mind, though, how big would they be on average? Let's say twice the size of a blue whale. So like 60 to 66 meters. Which, if you can imagine how fucking massive that is, yeah, this guy is not coming up on land. And this is going to be their primary layers of defense. Slime, size, and they fuck like crazy. Let's call them sea crones. But now, let's get into the things that eat these boys. On land, and probably a bit into the coastline and maybe into the water a little bit, is our first one. Now, looking at the predators of tortoises, I kind of thought that the idea of a giant constrictor snake would be badass, so that's what we're going with. And given that the things they're going to be hunting aren't just going to be big, but also very dangerous to wrap up and try to suffocate, we're going to change up their strategy a little bit. See, instead of swallowing a literally razor sharp shell, they're instead going to squeeze until the shell starts to buckle and crack open. And when it buckles, they'll force their way in and eat through beaked tortoise. Now, how much force is this horrifying mental image going to need? Yes. I'm not doing that math, but it's going to be a fuck ton. And since the shell can still cut them up, even when being swallowed, we're going to give them a few additions. Firstly, they're going to need to have a very thick hide, throat tissues, and also have gorilla grip skin. Since if the skin, touching a sharp surface, doesn't move, it can't really cut you if it's not sharp enough to press through the skin. We're also going to give them much less of a prey-catching teeth of a constrictor, and much more of the cutting and ripping teeth of something like a wolf. Which means, yes, horrifyingly, They could burrow into beak turtle and eat it from inside. Now, are these going to make them immune to the defenses of the tortoise? No. But evolution isn't about always, it's about enough. Also, the size is very easy to calculate since constrictors can only ever eat things up to 2/3 of their own size, so these guys are going to be 44 million kilograms, which is the weight of every cetacean, whale, dolphin, porpoise, in the entire ocean all put together at once, with a few, kilos to spare. Now, they're also going to need to be pretty long lengthwise, since most constrictors get about 5 times larger than their largest prey items. We'll just say they're 225 meters long at the most. Now, while it probably couldn't support itself to stand up like a cobra, it could stand about 75 meters tall and strike about as far. But again, they're dense and hefty, so probably not. And again, since constrictors don't need to eat very often, eating about 15% of their body weight at a time at regular intervals, just one beak turtle could last our snake for a very, very long time. Assuming about 900 calories per pound, assuming they're about as calorie dense as a snapping turtle, Thodohoppas would be about 52 billion calories. Meaning with the snake's unique hunting style, they'll get pretty easy nutrients and calories with plenty for the scavengers incoming. But since they hunt the world turtle, we'll call these guys Opeps. On the sea end, we once again hit a catch. Because the thing is, a creature that could hunt a sea crone without choking on the slime would need at least a 5th level Bukake resistance and no gills. But the problem is that the depth that these things would be living at, swimming down to that depth means a creature hunting them would need speed, accuracy, and immense lung capacity to get over 2,000 feet deep in the water. Since the younger ones near the surface of the water aren't going to be big enough for our kaiju. So we're going to go with a kind of Chronosaurus body plan, but way bigger than that. Now, while a 13-meter Chronosaurus could definitely take a chunk out of our beastie, I want something that can chomp it in half. So let's make it 10 times the size. A 130-meter long monster with a 27-meter long skull, most of that being teeth. However, because he's going to be hunting in the complete dark, I don't want to leave him with no way to even find these big-ass worms. So on top of that big body, we'll give them sensors all along their body to detect very subtle water movements and track specifically the patterns sea crones move in. On top of that, to make sure the sensors can get to the right places, let's add a massive tail-like growth of about 60 meters. At the end of it are special sea crone slime sensors and a electroshock organ, like an eel, to stun prey long enough for them to get down there. Which is all well and good, but once they get down there, what's the plan? Well, given that they are, in fact, about double the size of their prey, they're going to try to swallow them whole. Since they're a fish. So they sense the critter, shock it, and use their tail to lunge downwards, where then, to make sure too much slime isn't produced too fast, and the sea crone doesn't wriggle out or try to crawl through their gutty works, our monster releases a fish extendo jaw, like we see in some of God's biggest mistakes on this world, surrounded in barbs to prevent escape. Once it closes over the sea crone, the nostrils seal shut, seawater is expelled, and the entire worm is slurped into a forestomach that seals around them and slowly crushes it to death before all the slime is barfed up while the sea crone gets digested. Assuming things go well. Otherwise, they'll basically just cut off a big-ass piece and swim away. Until their prey gets so big that they're at risk of being eaten. Then at that point, turnabout is fair play, honestly. But we'll call them Typhonosaurs, which takes us to our land super predator. And this is going to be the species of our... and this is going to be the species of one of our headliners. So we're going to get all sorts of weird and wacky. Now, while it would make sense to think about the kinds of predators that hunt constrictor snakes and tortoises, after much research, I've found basically the things that hunt big-ass snakes are usually their prey items that more often than not get the upper hand. Think like alligators, jaguars, and other constrictor snakes. Of course, since I have a kaiju idea that I've had since I was 7 that I'd like to use, we're going with that. So the body plan is going to look like kind of a massive Komodo dragon with some changes. Firstly, the legs. The front legs are going to look like big ass reptile hands, and thicker back legs that face forward to temporarily at least support their weight. Secondly, they're going to have a much stronger jaw and rending teeth, which should be scary given that Komodos can crack bone with their tiny, tiny teeth and gums. And rather than poisonous spit glands, these guys are going to have a gland that produces a suspension of picric acid in saliva. Now, if you're unaware of picric acid, like I was until a week ago, picric acid is an organic acid that causes horrible skin damage and weakens protein bonds. It also is extremely bitter, causes severe membrane irritation in the eyes and lungs, and can cause liver and kidney damage with long-term exposure, which not only dissuades apeps from hunting them, but is a useful tool in attacking apeps by causing skin irritation and damage that lets them get into the meat a lot easier. Now, there's another secret effect of picric acid. See, when it dries out, it turns into unstable, explosive metal salts that react very violently to bashes and smashes, meaning that these guys dissuade apeps from attacking them, and even if their prey escapes, they can still track them from the strong picric acid smell until they find the exploded remains. So now let's talk about size. How big should these guys be? Well, to hunt apeps effectively, they should be pretty close to their size, preferably out of the standard prey range. So let's make them 100 meters long and a matching 33 million kilos, enough to threaten and be threatened by an apep. Which also means their height would come out to around 100 meters when they stand up very briefly. Although, if we make their tails thicker, they could stand up all the time, and wait, this is turning into Godzilla. Yeah, I really didn't give a fuck about copyright law when I was 7, but we'll call them Mozodons, after the kaiju I made, Mozilla. Very creative child. And then we have the sea apex predator, the one hunting down typhonosaurs. And given that they're an apex predator, they're also going to be a headliner. And we're getting really fucking weird with this one, especially because they'll be fighting Mozodons in our kaiju movie that's totally going to happen. Now, given that they'll need to be amphibious and also I'm wanting weird, let's make a colony organism. These organisms are ones that clump together, sharing resources and specializations to form a larger organism while maintaining individuality. If you're still lost, think like Tyranids. A lot of their stuff are colony organisms. And if you're not that kind of nerd and you're still lost, some of the largest earth creatures like sponges, coral, and man-o-wars are also colony organisms. This one we're making as a colony organism, but as a sexually dimorphic species rather than just being entirely different creatures. In this case, the central bulb that everything else connects to is basically an organ sac that has all the brain power, long-term digestive and reproductive organs, and biological capacity to do stuff like regenerate. The other part of the species, in this case we'll probably just call them the males, are basically long-ass super armored tentacles with mouths all the way down their underside and gripping hooks along its length, and some mandibles at the end. They basically only have the capacity to turn food into glucose, produce sperm, grip things, eat hot chip, and lie. But basically what these things do is they mob up around the female organs and just kind of jam their sharp little butthole into it. Yet nature's weird. And then get permanently fused into the female. If she accepts the sacrifice of glucose, she also accepts the jism and begins to fuse it in. Otherwise, her immune system invades and kills the male, who is then eaten by the other tentacles. And they mostly survive by thrashing around and floating across the ocean, latching on the continental shelves and sometimes crawling onto land and coastlines to hunt. And just to add to the horror, let's make them fucking titanic. Like 3 times the typhosaurs. Like 3 times the typhons. Like 3 times the typhonosaurs. Meaning, when fully stretched out, they're about 390 meters in diameter. with the female in the middle being about a quarter of that. So she'll be like 98 meters around, and each tentacle will be about 190 meters. Of course, when it's moving, very few of them will actually be fully extended, meaning it'll be much closer to 120 to 150 meters around. When they're hunting, though, they'll probably just sit in place, and most of the tentacles will stretch out and wait to grab stuff. And since it's been a theme in the ocean, they don't have a maximum size, but eventually they won't be able to move and they'll just die that way. Let's call them hydrans, named after the Hydra from mythology. And since we've covered our sea decomposers, we only have our one land one. And here's the deal, I don't think we can really top anything else here, make something wildly interesting for the land decomposers. It's kind of a thankless job that just someone has to do, and generally speaking, the simpler and less obtrusive you are as a decomposer, the better for you. So let's do giant ants, about 50 times larger than a normal ant, putting these mini kaiju at 2.6 meters apiece. For the workers, at least. Given that it's kaiju land and already ant warriors can be 2 to 15 times bigger than the workers, we'll split the difference and say 10. So while the workers are scavenging the corpses of Apeps and Thotahapa, as well as whatever the fuck else is in this hellhole, they're being guarded by 26-meter ants with big fuck-off mandibles, a poison bite, and a real shit attitude. And since they'll be primary decomposers, these creatures will scour through the oxygen-rich undergrowth, eating basically anything that doesn't put up too much of a fight and running away from everything else. And let's call these guys Fomorians. Now, here's the big question. How are these things getting out of Kaiju Land? Well, the good news for us is that they wouldn't. Sure, sea crones could range out more, but the problem for them is that their food source is pretty locked to the continent. Those specific chemotrophs are, not everywhere. Meaning they can't really stray too far without another good food source nearby. Which means Typhonosaurs and Hydrans couldn't really get that far either. And sure, Monzodons and Apeps could float, but they don't really have the ability to swim far enough out to... who am I kidding? We'd be stupid enough as a species to invade their space, bring back eggs, and boom! An entire urban ecosystem built around a Monzodon that we decided to bring home for no goddamn reason. But anyways, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you have opinions, improvements, corrections, anything else you want to talk about, comment below or email me at waytatpods@gmail.com. That's WAYTATPODS@gmail.com. And remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. And follow my podcast feed for audio versions. And come back next time when we ask where exactly art can go. Oh yeah, we're towing the line next time. Have a good night. Don't murder. Have fun. And remember, don't go to Kaiju Land. Holy fuck, have you seen the snakes? This has been Why Are You Talking About This? I've been your host, William. Good night.